Hello, everybody. I'm talking today about the incredible risks facing men who care for children. It's so easy for them to find themselves subject to a false allegation which could totally ruin their lives. I'll be speaking to Debbie Garratt, and she's one of the original group of women who helped me set up Mothers of Sons. She and I were in touch a bit over 2 years ago when her stepson Lucas was halfway through his dreadful ordeal. He'd been accused of inappropriate sexual conduct with a child he'd been babysitting. This allegation led him to spend 7 months in prison. He was plastered all over the local newspaper, described as a pedo, had death threats on social media. The whole family had been living their lives on hold for year after year. Last Wednesday, after a 3-day hearing, a female judge found him not guilty. She said she believed Lucas's version of events. I'm really delighted that Debbie has decided to go public and warn other parents about how easy it is for a male to find himself in this situation. Hello, Debbie.
Hi, how are you?
Very good. I'm so happy you're doing this, and I'm so happy for you. I've been waiting for the result of this dreadful case you've been facing, and it was so wonderful to hear you had good news last week.
Yes, it's still a little bit surreal for us at the moment. So 3 years and 8 months we've been living through this, and we're, I think, day 5 past the verdict, and we're still kind of checking with each other that it really happened.
Yeah, I can imagine. Now, Debbie, let's tell people a little bit about yourself. You're a very well-educated woman. You've got a PhD, spent much of your career in counselling. Just give us a bit of background.
Sure. So currently I'm in private practice as a clinical supervisor. So what that means is I'm kind of a counsellor to counsellors. My clients are, doctors, psychologists, family violence workers, social workers, etc. I've been doing that for, in some capacity, for about 20 years.
And you have 2 children, 4 stepchildren, and Lucas is one of your stepson, and he was 25 when this all began. He was working in childcare.
He was, yeah. So I have 2 children. I had my 2 children when I was a teenager. I married my husband when I was 35. He had 4 children. Lucas was 6, and I'd known him since he was born, and raised him for most of his life. We shared custody for a few years, and then we had full custody of the children. Yes, he was 25. He had been living out of home for maybe 5 years, I think. He'd worked in some retail sectors, and then decided to study early childhood education, and got a job in childcare, which on one side was great because he'd always been wonderful with children. However, myself and my husband were very aware of the politics around men in these spaces, and we'd had quite a few of those discussions with him.
Yeah. Now, this family he was looking after, he was babysitting for that night. He'd been involved in their lives for many years. He knew the child in question since she was a toddler. He'd been involved in changing her nappies, looking after her in all sorts of ways. Tell us a bit about his involvement with this family.
Yes, the family, he'd first met the family because they had their children cared for at the childcare centre he was working at. And Lucas cared for, or was asked to babysit for, quite a number of families out of his work at that childcare centre, so private babysitting. And this was the same scenario. So this is not an allegation of something that occurred at the centre he was working at. It was an allegation that occurred in the family home, where he had cared for the children on maybe 4 to 6 occasions over the course of several months without any incident or concern. The kids loved him. the mother would often say that the kids were super excited to see him, and that they'd had an amazing time. So there was not ever any concern or any issues of any kind except of the most positive kind in his interactions with these children over the years.
Mm-hmm. So we now at August 2018, and he's looking after these children. Now tell us what happened with this little girl.
It was the next morning, so he looked after them in the evening, and the next, actually it was the next afternoon, he went to work at the childcare centre, and in the afternoon the police arrived at the childcare centre and took him down to the police station. He was arrested for questioning. However, he didn't really seem to understand what that meant. And so in the trial, one of the things that the judge talked about was that it seemed implausible that someone wouldn't understand the process of the fact that being arrested was more serious than what he'd initially thought. However, she also talked about the fact that she perceived him as quite naive, and that was a really accurate assessment. He believed being cautioned and going to the police station for questioning was simply part of police process. He didn't think that he wasn't scared that he'd done anything wrong.
Debbie, can you just tell us what happened the night before, how this all began?
Sure. He was babysitting for several hours, and during the evening he described the girl as fidgeting. That's how he described it to police, and what that meant was that she was scratching her vulval area, and that had gone on a little bit during the evening. When he had put the children to bed, this had continued. She was half asleep and or mostly asleep, depending on, the girl's testimony was different about whether she'd actually seen him or whether she was asleep or not asleep. And what he did was wipe her with a baby wipe. So he gave a single wipe to her vulval area with a baby wipe because he went in, she's still scratching, and he thought, perhaps there's some issue here. And in his mind, the right thing to do was simply to do that and address it. And it was over for him. He didn't give it a second thought.
Mm-hmm. And I did mention that this is someone he'd known since she was a toddler. She'd been in nappies. He'd yes. had that sort of experience of looking after her in that very intimate way. So this was nothing new.
No.
So there you go. All right. So the first you hear is when he comes home and tells you the police have been there.
Correct. So he came home after work that day. He'd been interviewed by police, and the police had dropped him back to work at the childcare centre. Mm-hmm. He spoke to his boss. The police also spoke to his boss, and they kind of said, well, nothing else was going to happen at this point in time. So he came home. By that time, he'd kind of clicked that things weren't quite right. He hadn't told the police that he had wiped the little girl with the baby wipe, because halfway through the interview, he realised that actually this was maybe what had been misinterpreted, and he thought he'd be able to ring the parents and just explain. So at the end of the police interview, he was told he wasn't allowed to contact anyone. He came home. He told us the full detail of what had occurred, said, can we just please ring the parents, which was part of, I guess, the 25-year-old naivety that he still felt at that point we can just fix it with a phone call. So he told us everything, and he was very, very, very distressed and crying that the family thought he had done something to harm their child, and that mm-hmm. she might have thought he had done something as well. And that was the nature of his distress at that point in time.
Debbie, now tell us what happened, how the mother found out what happened to this little girl, what she told her mum.
So the morning after Lucas had babysat, she had come out to her mum and said, why did Lucas lick me? And the process from there, as was produced in evidence, was that the mother had told the girl to stop talking. She had set up her phone camera. She had screamed for her husband, which was her words, and then she had video recorded the same thing. So she then said, tell mummy and daddy what happened, and the girl had said the same thing. And the process from there for them was to contact the police.
And the judge talked a little bit about that interaction between the mother or the parents and the child, and way that may have contributed to how the whole thing escalated.
She did, and that was part of our side of things as well, and the judge, kind of concurred that there was a huge, from a simple query about a misinterpreted act, things had escalated very quickly in terms of the emotional tone, and that was very obvious on the video recording that the mother took, that there was a huge sense of heightened alarm around those things. And whilst we have never, I always thought, well, perhaps we could have resolved this with a phone call. I don't know. Perhaps Lucas could have called them. I mean, we couldn't after the police said not to. However, they then, once they went to the police station, the system really then just took over, and for them, it became almost a fact of what had happened, that that this thing had been perpetrated.
Yeah. But what I think was really interesting is you told me that at the police station, the police, of course, asked, the child was spoken to and was asked directly whether anything had happened and whether Lucas had touched her or put his head near her. Anyway, you explained that, because I think that's terribly important, the fact that the child herself said this didn't happen.
Yes, that's right. So in the first interview, which was not the official record of interview, so it's an interview where the police simply produced notes. So when the family took the girl to the police station in the morning, she was asked 3 direct questions about whether Lucas had touched her, whether he had licked her, whether he had put his face near her. And 3 times she said no, no, no. And she was then, at the conclusion of that was the end of that interview, according to the notes, she was then sent for an invasive forensic exam at the hospital where they were taking vaginal swabs, etc. And we later found out that the fact of those denials had not been put in the brief, the legal brief, and had not been told to the parents before charges were even laid. So they didn't form part of the decision-making about whether he would be charged, which didn't even come till 6 months later.
Yeah, and of course this is a 5-year-old girl being subject to this sort of interrogation, internal examination and so on. Is extraordinary. And this is what happens, of course, with some of these situations where something happens and then the poor kids are put through the mill as a result of the anxiety of the parents. Anyway, and in this case, as a result of a totally inappropriate anxiety, as it turned out. And it could have, maybe it could have been sorted out with direct contact. Yeah. Okay, so then this whole ghastly ordeal really began. Tell us what happened, just briefly, Deb, please.
Sure. So Lucas had then been formally interviewed, then told charges may or may not ensue. They took DNA from him. He was relieved about having DNA taken because he knew there would be no DNA. So he went back to work. The childcare centre, in the ensuing 6 months, even though they knew about these allegations, he went from being a casual employee to a permanent employee. Many people learned about what had occurred. A couple of families removed their children from the childcare centre. Other families rallied around him and said that they didn't believe this could have happened. Whilst this was going on, my husband and I were really busy nursing his father, who was dying from a terminal illness. We kind of thought it might just go away. We'd sought some legal advice about whether we needed to do anything, and the advice was that until he was charged, there was nothing that could be done, that we didn't need a lawyer. And then out of the blue, 6 months later, the police knocked at his door and said that he was being charged with 3 counts of sexual assault against a child.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then the local media picked it up. It was all over the front pages. You live in a relatively small town or a city. I assume an awful lot of people knew about this. He started getting death threats. Tell us a bit about that situation.
Yeah, the local media was pretty horrendous in the way that they portrayed this. Words like, he had repeatedly sexually assaulted, was charged with repeatedly sexually assaulting a child. The photos they put his photos on the front page of the newspaper, and they picked up photos from his or his friends' Facebook pages that just showed him in this awful light. But they were kind of times when he was just having fun with his friends, when they were at op shops buying costumes to go to a costume party, and they showed him with some, big red corset. And the social media was pretty horrendous, that there were threats of real harm toward him, and death threats. And it was very, very, he immediately quit his job. Then we had huge issues with even him wanting to leave the house. And, of course, there was things about us as well as his parents, what kind of people raise a pedo. And we're very well known in our community. So lots of people knew us and connected us to Lucas, of course. So that was kind of, that had its challenges. We were confident, though, that we were, known in a very positive light. We had lots of people rally around us as well. Many people know Lucas and have done for, know us just as well. And most people couldn't fathom that he would be capable of such a thing.
Debbie, what I was really shocked about was the involvement of the legal aid barrister and the fact that he actually really bullied Lucas into doing a plea bargain, and which really set him up for his time in prison.
Yeah, so after being charged in February, there was a hearing in Melbourne in September where we attended just to listen to that part of the hearing. There was no expectation that there would be any involvement of Lucas at all during that time. However, on the first day, it became apparent just in listening to the judge and the prosecution that they seemed to believe that this situation would be resolved. In fact, the judge said to our barrister, perhaps we can resolve this today, and we didn't really understand what that meant until there was an adjournment, and I overheard the prosecutor talking to the barrister saying they were going to proceed on all 3 charges. They were going to seek the highest penalty, put him on a lifetime register unless they could get him to make a plea deal. And the barrister said he had been trying. Now, that actually wasn't even true because Lucas had never considered taking a plea. But what then happened was we heard a lot of, you used the word bullying, and that's how it felt on the day. There was this huge pressure about you will spend 10 or 15 years in prison, that it will be your responsibility if the girl has to testify. They'll only be lenient with you if you don't put her through that. The jury will never acquit you. We had arguments with the barrister in this corridor. It wasn't even a private space, about the fact that what was important was that Lucas tell the truth. And he said more than once, the truth doesn't matter. This isn't about the truth. He talked about it being about politics, that a jury would never acquit when they heard what this girl had to say, and that Lucas should plead guilty for a more lenient sentence. And in the end, with that pressure, that's what he decided to do, and that was a terrible mistake, and we all knew it straight away. We were told that he would come home with us pending sentencing, and in the back of my mind I had this sense that we'd be able to take him home and then seek some more legal advice. However, we couldn't take him home. They arrested him and took him into custody straight away, and we didn't even know where he was for about 10 days.
That's so terrible. And and so he ended up then spending 7 months in prison while you desperately tried to undo the damage this legal aid barrister had really caused.
Yeah. So when we finally found out where he was, the panic we lived with in that time was just for his safety and all sorts of things you can just imagine. But when we went to see him, I think it was maybe 2 weeks later, we went to see him, and one of the first things that he talked to me about was that the barrister had gone to see him after he was taken into custody and said to him that now we need to do a psychological assessment. So you're going to have to talk to the psychologist about how sorry you are and tell them why you did what you did. And Lucas had said to him, but I didn't do it. And he said to me, I think this was just so difficult for me to hear. He said to me, Debbie, you've worked with people who might have done this before. I need you to tell me why someone would do it, because I can't even think of a reason. And he said, I have to say. And he said, I've already said I've done it. And so I can say I did it again if that's what I have to do to get through this. But I can't think of a reason why anyone would do this. And I don't think I can make that up. And I said to him, don't. I said, we're going to fix this. And that's when we started looking for a different legal representation.
And you actually succeeded. You eventually managed to get the plea reversed, and he was let out of prison. But that's when around then, at some point then, we got together. I mean, you faced years of then waiting for a new trial. And, you know, all your life's on hold. Lucas really struggling to get a job. You'd already spent $60,000. That was part of your superannuation savings, so on. Tell us about, that's when we first started talking to each other, what that period was like.
Yeah, so getting the plea reversed was, we were told that less than 10% of cases ever get a plea reversal, so we didn't know that would happen. Our legal team was surprised it happened, just from the perspective of it happened so rarely. He came home to live with us. Interestingly, the only bail condition was that he attend the police station each week, which stopped very quickly, even that with COVID. There were no conditions around his contact with anybody, including children, so he came home, lived with us. Unfortunately, the papers had also picked up the guilty plea, so that had been all over the news as well. So the community thought that he was guilty. There was not anything about the reversal of the plea because the judge at the time was so he didn't use the word disgusted, but that was my perspective, just so disgusted by the way in which this had been portrayed in the media prior, that he put a suppression order in place so nothing could then be put in the media. So that didn't get out anywhere. And of course, we couldn't talk about it publicly either. So the next couple of years, of course, COVID delayed lots of the legal proceedings, and it was really another 2 years or more than 2 years before it finally came to trial. Mm-hmm. And at that time, which was only 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago now, it was a 3-day trial plus closing arguments. It was relatively brief. It was a judge alone trial, not a jury trial. Judge alone, the law had only recently passed to allow judge alone trials, and the purpose was to move the backlog of cases that had built up during COVID. It was suggested to us repeatedly and by more than one source that a judge would see the evidence, not be persuaded by the allegation itself and the politics, etc., like a jury might be. So that would be...
Sorry to interrupt you, but of course we have to think of Brittany Higgins here and the politics around that. I mean, the fact that this judge alone probably ended up with a result that you might not have got with a jury says a lot, doesn't it? And the fact it was a female judge gives me hope for this world, I must say, and that she was able to make this considered decision based on the evidence is something, isn't it?
It is. And for us, it was really important that she not only found him not guilty on all the charges, but she also talked about the fact that in her judgment, what Lucas said occurred. So it wasn't just a case of, actually prosecution didn't prove their case, or there's just simply, slightly not enough evidence. But there was no DNA on the child at all, on her body. There was DNA on her clothing, but of course, every time you touch a surface, there's DNA. So there was really no real evidence that this had occurred, and the judge concurred with that and said that in her judgment, in her fact finding, that what occurred was that Lucas had wiped her with a baby wipe, and that was significant for us. However, that's also, again, not how the paper reported it. The report in the paper, leaves room for people to think he just got off.
Yeah. I mean, now, of course, when he first went to prison, he was all over the front pages, his photos were shown, and now the judge has made this very important determination. You get a tiny little mention back in the paper, is that right?
Yeah, it was page 4, and it again rehashed what the charges had been. So, it's trying to sensationalise that. But, yeah, page 4 of the paper, all over the front page at least 3 times during the process, and this time this is all he got. So, yep.
Yep. And, of course, we've got, you have to spare a thought for this child's family. And where did they go with this? They've got such an investment in this narrative about their child being abused. Very hard to come back from that, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, so we've lived this with this for 3 years and 8 months, and so have they. And I agree, it will be very challenging, even if they want to reframe this experience in light of what the determination has been. So this family will spend, however long, and this girl will spend, her life believing she's been subject to sexual abuse that simply didn't happen. And we have, and I have huge compassion for that. There's never been a moment where any of us have had any feelings of negativity toward the process as the family undertook it. we don't know until we're in that situation how we would do it. But the system propelled this forward in a way that made it grow into something it shouldn't have.
Yeah. Particularly when the child herself had said, no, he didn't come there, he didn't do that, he didn't do this. One of the things we talked about when we first got together, Debbie, was your lessons learnt. That, the idea that you said you'd prepared your son because he was working in childcare, you talked to him about some of the risks, but we don't prepare young men adequately. We don't teach them to say no when the police come along. Tell me about some of the things you now think we should be telling our kids.
We had never spoken to our kids about the need to call a lawyer if you're ever picked up by police. We would always, that would be the first thing now. And in fact, I don't know that I would have either called a lawyer just because police wanted to talk to me about something. But I think that that's of prime importance, that if police want to talk to you about something, that you seek legal advice, that you don't speak.
You don't do an interview with the police. I mean, no one tells you that. Don't talk to the police. But that's just a lesson you've learned, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. The other lesson that we learned is seek out the best lawyers and pay them. We had no idea where the money was going to come from. We have material assets. We live in a beautiful home and drive lovely cars, but we don't have money sitting in the bank. And we had no idea where the money would come from to pay our legal team. And it was a huge amount of money. It was over $100,000 in the end. I know other people spend much more than that. But it was worth every dollar to have the right representation, people who knew the law and cared about our case. And our legal team did care about our case because they believed that what Lucas said happened. And so get a good lawyer. Don't talk to the police without a lawyer would be my primary things to advise to people, because the cost is huge. At the end of this trial, on the day of the verdict, the judge said to Lucas, "You are free to go." And we have to think about what that means. He's lived his years from age 25 to 29 in our home, sometimes scared to leave the house. When he did get a job, it's in a production line in a factory, not his childcare career. He's put every dollar that he earns into the bank to help cover, because he wanted to contribute to the legal fees. We didn't have that expectation. He's lost his career. Some of his friends have married and had babies in that time. And the impact of prison was huge on him as well. Prison's not a nice place to spend 7 months. So whatever the cost, money, is meaningless when it comes to the other factors.
Mm-hmm. What would you say about the implications in terms of men who want to work with children? Is it always too risky? I mean, I'm beginning to think men should never be teachers, men should never work in childcare, men should never babysit, males should never babysit for children. I just think it's the world we live in, it's too dangerous for them.
I think it is too, and I think that's terribly sad. And I would have hoped would never get to that point, but I do think it's too dangerous a place for men now. We have this huge suspicion about men in all sorts of ways. What even is their motivation for wanting to work in aged care, for example, or be nurses or work in childcare? We have demonised men to the point that we paint them with a guilty brush even before they've allegedly done anything. And I don't know how we change that. I think it's a tragedy, because I think we're pulling men out of spaces where their contribution is so needed and necessary and so valuable, that the risk is just so huge.
And what really worries me is we've got lots of loving fathers who've been encouraged to be engaged in every aspect of their children's lives, and if that marriage breaks up, all those times when Daddy was in the shower with the little kids, or the stuff that good, loving fathers do with their kids, could be used against them. And I mean, I just find that horrific, that we are potentially weaponising all fathers' interactions with their children in this situation.
Yes, absolutely. You know, I think it's hard for, you know, one of the reasons I'm talking about this is that I think it's always important to give marginalised groups, people who are generally silent about things, a voice. And so I'm not afraid to do that. And one of the things I did was put on my own personal Facebook page the fact that this had occurred in very brief detail, just to let my friends and family know that we'd had a not guilty verdict. And I had 2 people contact me who I know who related similar experiences that I'd never known they'd experienced. And on social media, I had 3 other people contact me, one of whom had a very tragic story of a relative, a male relative who had committed suicide, going through a very similar experience of a false accusation. And that's why I think we need to talk about these things, and perhaps that, you know, the more we talk about it, perhaps that's how we gain some change, the recognition that false allegations have this huge and terrible impact, not just on the lives of men, but on their entire families. Our lives came to a halt, and we're all going to take a very long time to heal, and the family is going to take a long time to heal as well.
Yeah. Well, Debbie, I think what you're doing is really important and brave too, to go out publicly, to give your full name, to tell this terrible story, to show that families who have to deal with these sort of issues don't have to hide themselves. They need to speak out. They need to say, this is the truth. We have to understand that false allegations are sometimes made, and that we have lived through this, and you're telling the story partly to encourage others to be more open about what's happening across our country.
Yeah, and look, it's also to help Lucas make meaning from this. You know, one of the ways toward healing for him will be to create some meaning, and we've always talked to him about that right through this process. You will learn things from this that will be so valuable, you'll turn them to good at some time later. And it's a bit like when he came home from prison and he was a bit scared to go out, and I would take him out to the supermarket and I'd say, just put your head up, Lucas, you haven't done anything wrong. And that's what this is as well. You know, it's important to not be caught in shame as a result of an allegation, as a result of what people say about you or think about you. It's important to demonstrate to other people that you don't have to hide away and be silent. In fact, it's really important to speak.
Debbie, thank you very much. I'm sure many people watching this will want to contact you. I don't know if I should do this to you, but maybe we can put your Facebook contact or something up on below this video, in case people want to take strength from your story. And I suppose it's for once we've got a positive story, a positive ending, and it's important we celebrate that. Lovely to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
That's it, folk. Don't forget to like and subscribe to my videos. You can also read my free blogs on Substack. See the link in the details below this video, as well as information about donating to help me cover costs. Please spread the word about my important work advocating for men.